What's the difference between this phrase, this phrase, this phrase, and this phrase? Well, what if I told you that all of these phrases are actually the same thing? Let's break it down in today's video. Welcome back, everyone. My name is Nate Komp from Dimecast, the guitar education channel that is dedicated to defying your musical expectations. In today's video, we're going to explore the idea of maximizing your melodic mileage with a single phrase. This is something that I work on all of the time with my private students, and it begins with this one piece of advice. Stop being in such a hurry to get to the next melodic idea. Instead, take the time to explore the potential of a single melodic statement and use that one phrase as the basis for expanding your overall melodic vocabulary. In this video, I'm going to outline the step-by-step process that I use to develop this idea in my own playing. And make sure you stick around to the end, where I'm going to share an extra bonus step that really brings this stuff to life. Okay, let's dive right in. Let's start with the first step that you must be able to do before we get into the real magic of this method. Step one is to simply create a short melodic phrase using only 3 or 4 notes. Now, this phrase can come from any key center or any scale type that you want. For this lesson, I'm going to use a 4-note phrase that comes from the A minor pentatonic scale. Now, you want to play this phrase in a tonal context so you can hear what this melody sounds like in relation to an underlying chord or tonality. I like to do this using my freeze pedal, where I will set up a drone chord in the background, in this case an A minor chord, and then play the phrase on top of it. Make sure that you write down the musical alphabet letter names of each of the notes within this phrase, okay? In this case, I'm using the notes D to E to C to A, all from the A minor pentatonic scale. Now, once you've got that phrase together, you should be able to sing the phrase as you play it. I'm a big fan of the concept of vocalize to internalize, and this step is crucial when it comes to getting the sound of the phrase in your ear. Now, you don't have to be a great singer to do this. This is much more about internalizing the pitch movement that's built into the phrase. Once you can sing the phrase as you play it, then you want to write down the melodic shape or the melodic contour of the melody. This will give you a visual representation of the pitch direction from one note to the next, as well as the pitch distance from one note to the next. Now, depending on how your phrase is built, the melodic contour will most likely contain some combination of steps, skips, or leaps. In this example, where I'm starting on the note D, I'm moving up a step to the note E, then down to C using a skip, and then down to A using another skip. I personally like to write down melodic contour using notes on a music staff, but you don't have to do that. Just writing down the overall melodic shape of the phrase is enough. I also like to write down the tonal interval number for each melodic note within the phrase, okay? In this example, where I'm playing, a melody in the key of A minor, I would have the note D is the 4th of the key, the note E is the 5th of the key, the note C is the minor third or the flat third of the key, and then the note A is the root note of the key. Now, you don't necessarily have to do this, but in my experience, I have found that labeling the tonal intervals really helps to reinforce in my mind as well as in my ear which notes in the phrase are consonant in relation to the underlying chord, and which notes are dissonant in relation to the underlying chord. Once you've got all of the elements from step 1 together, then the fun begins. Step 2 is to practice playing the phrase using as many different forms of expressive stylistic technique as you possibly can, which means incorporating various types of inflection and articulation. Let me set up my drone chord again, okay? Now, I could play the phrase with a very straight interpretation like this, but a much more expressive interpretation might be something like this, where I'm adding a grace note, a slight bend, and a vibrato. Or I might do something like this. So I'm doing bend and vibrato, grace note, and vibrato. Now, if you've been playing for a while, the application of expressive stylistic techniques will probably come pretty natural to you. But the creative use in inflections and articulations is not something that comes easy to everyone, which is why this step is so important. I've mentioned this before in other videos, but it bears repeating. Every note that you play is an opportunity to be expressive, and you want to take advantage of every opportunity that comes your way in regards to using inflections and articulations within a melodic phrase. The goal here is to get to the point with your technique where these expressive stylistic elements just appear naturally in your playing in a spontaneous and organic way. Now, when it comes to writing down these examples, I like to use a combination of music staff notation along with guitar tablature notation to show exactly which types of stylistic techniques are being applied and exactly where they are happening within the phrase. Step 2 is a real test of your personal creativity, and you should be able to play at least 4 uniquely different stylistic interpretations of this one basic phrase using a variety of inflections, articulations, and expressive techniques. Step 3 is the first real challenge because you really have to know your fretboard to do this. For step 3, you want to repeat the phrase using the same letters and the same pitches, but change the fingering of the phrase on the fretboard. So let me set up my drone chord. I might change the fingering of the original phrase from this to this, or maybe this, maybe this, or even this. Now, the important thing here is that all of these new fingerings contain the same musical alphabet letters, the same pitches, the same tonal functions, and the same melodic contour. Because the guitar fretboard is filled with unisons or duplicate pitches, I can dramatically change the fingering of a phrase while still maintaining the overall integrity of the melody. Back in step 1, I had mentioned the idea of singing a phrase as you play it, using the concept of vocalize to internalize. Well, if I go through each of the 5 fingerings of this phrase that I just played and I sing each one of them, they will all sound exactly the same because they are exactly the same. Here's my drone chord again, okay? So, do da da da, da 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 da, da 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 da, That's pretty crazy, okay? When it comes to writing down these examples, I like to use a combination of music staff notation along with guitar tablature notation, simply because music staff notation is not enough. As a matter of fact, you will notice that the music staff notation does not change from one fingering example to the next, even though the guitar tablature notation is uniquely different from one example to the next. This is one of the most challenging aspects of understanding the nature of the guitar fretboard, and it's exactly why this particular step is so important. With step 3, you should be able to play the phrase that you have created with at least 5 different fingerings. And those fingerings should be based on using all of the same musical alphabet letters, the same pitches, the same tonal functions, and the same melodic contour. Step 4 is just like step 2, but it's a little more in depth. For step 4, you want to practice playing each of the new fingerings that you just explored in step 3, using many different forms of expressive stylistic technique. You are going to find that each of the new fingerings that you worked out in step 3 will kind of invite you to use certain types of inflections and articulations. For example, the original fingering of the phrase looked like this. And one of the new fingerings that we worked out in step 3 looked like this. Now, because this particular fingering exists entirely on a single string, I could choose to stylize it using a bunch of sliding techniques like this. And this is something that I probably never would have considered doing if I only knew the original fingering of this phrase. Another one of the new fingerings looked like this. And because this fingering exists on 2 adjacent strings, I could choose to stylize it using legato technique, maybe with a hammer-on the G string and a pull-off on the D string. Once again, this is something that I probably wouldn't have considered doing if I only knew the original fingering of this phrase, okay? Step 4 is going to continue to test your personal creativity, and you should be able to play at least 4 uniquely different stylistic interpretations of each of the new fingerings that you explored in step 3. If you do that with at least 5 different fingerings of the basic phrase, that's 20 different stylistic interpretations of a single melodic statement. Now we're getting somewhere. Step 5 is the next real challenge because it also relies on a solid understanding of fretboard mechanics. With step 5, we want to move the phrase into other octaves and other registers. I really like this step because it's such a powerful way to illustrate how different a phrase can sound and feel when it is played in a mid-range register versus a lower register versus a much higher register. Now, each of these variations are based on the same musical alphabet letters, the same tonal functions, and the same melodic contour, but the pitches are now being sounded either an octave above or an octave below the original phrase. I like to write down these new variations using music staff notation because it gives me a really good visual representation of what each octave in each register actually looks like as far as the range of pitch that is being used within each phrase. I like to work on steps 6, 7, and 8 at the same time because it's just like what we did in steps 2, 3, and 4. Okay, so step 6 is to practice playing the higher octave and lower octave interpretations of the phrase that you just explored in step 5 using a variety of inflections and articulations. So I had the original phrase, I could move it down an octave, but now I want to stylize that. Okay? Step 7 is to practice playing the higher octave and lower octave interpretations using different fingerings all around the fretboard. So here was the original phrase, up an octave. Now maybe change the fingering of that. Okay, now once I've got that together and I want to move on to step 8. Step 8 is to practice all of the new fingerings that I just explored in step 7, but using a variety of expressive stylistic techniques. So the original phrase, up an octave, change the fingering, and then stylize it. pretty cool sounding stuff. Now, once again, when it comes to writing down these examples, I like to use a combination of a music staff along with guitar tablature so that I can notate exactly what octave I'm playing in and exactly what fingering I'm using. And I can also be very specific about what types of stylistic techniques are being applied to each phrase. If you work on playing the basic phrase in 3 different octaves, and you practice at least 5 different fingerings in each octave, and then you apply a variety of expressive stylistic techniques to each of those fingerings in each octave, you're going to have a lot of stuff to practice, but this is exactly what maximizing melodic mileage is all about. Step 9 is probably my favorite step because it was a real game changer for me when I first learned it. In step 9, we're going to apply the idea of melodic interval inversion. This is done by modifying the melodic contour and the melodic shape of the original phrase, which means changing pitch direction as well as pitch distance. And I'm going to give you 3 different variations of this, okay? So if I set up my drone chord, okay, the original phrase ascended from D to E with a step, from E down to C, which was a skip, and from C down to A, which was another skip. Okay, so step up, skip down with the letters D, E, C, A. Okay, let's take that first move, D to E, which is an ascending step, and let's do the mirror image of that move melodically. This is what interval inversion is. Instead of D up to E, I'm going to go D down to E. I've flipped over the interval without changing the names of the notes or their functions within the key. So D, E, C, A becomes D, E, C, A. It's a whole new sound, a whole new kind of melodic story that's still spelled the same, but the shape is very different. Okay, here's the next one. Start with the original phrase, D, E, C, A. Let's take this move of E down to C, and let's make that, instead of a descending move, E to C, let's make that an ascending move, D, E, C, and then resolve it to A. So here is the original. Here's melodic interval inversion. Totally different melodic sentence. Finally, if we start with the original phrase, D to E to C down to A, how about D, E, C up to A? So I've taken this descending move, C to A, and I've made it an ascending move. So original phrase, first variation, second variation, and third variation. Pretty crazy, okay? Now, each of these variations are based on the same musical alphabet letters and the same tonal functions, but the pitch movements are uniquely different from one example to the next. You will often hear melodic interval inversion referred to as octave displacement, which is the idea of moving an individual pitch within a phrase, either up an octave or down an octave, while maintaining the same musical alphabet spelling and the same tonal functions. I like to write down these new pitch movement variations using music staff notation because it gives me a really good visual representation of what each phrase looks like, and I can really see the changes in melodic contour and melodic shape from one variation to the next, where notes that used to go down, now they go up, and notes that used to go up, now they go down, okay? When I work on this stuff with my private students, I actually try to avoid giving them the tablature for these examples right away. And I will usually just give them the music staff notation of these new variations with just the melodic shapes and the melodic contours written out. And the reason I do this is that it forces them to find a way to play these new pitch movements on their own. I don't want to rob someone of the process of figuring this stuff out for themselves, which is what happens if I just, hand somebody a piece of tablature with all the phrases already worked out for them. I'm robbing them of that process. When you figure out these phrases for yourself, you increase your understanding of the fretboard and exactly how various forms of pitch motion are interpreted on the guitar neck. For the final series of steps, I like to work on them all at the same time because these final steps are really just an extension of everything that we have already covered so far. Beginning with step 10. Step 10 is to practice playing these new melodic contour interpretations that we discovered in step 9 using a variety of expressive stylistic techniques. Step 11 is to practice playing these new melodic contour interpretations using different fingerings around the fretboard. Step 12 is to practice those new fingerings using a variety of inflections and articulations. Step 13 is to practice playing the new melodic contour interpretations from step 9 in other octaves and in other registers. Step 14, practice playing those higher and lower octave interpretations of these new melodic contours using a variety of expressive stylistic techniques. Step 15 is to practice playing higher and lower octave interpretations of these new melodic contours using different fingerings around the fretboard. And finally, step 16, practice all of these new fingerings for the higher and lower octave interpretations using a whole variety of inflections and articulations. When it comes to writing down all of these examples, once again, I like to use a combination of a music staff along with guitar tablature so that I can properly notate the melodic contour and melodic shape of each phrase, also the register and the octave of each phrase, the specific fingering for each phrase, and of course the different types of stylistic techniques that are being applied to each phrase. At the beginning of this video, I had mentioned a bonus step that you can add into this process that really brings this stuff to life, and here it is. Every example that I've shown you so far has been played over a drone chord background so that you could hear each phrase in the proper tonal context. And I practice like this all the time when I'm working on new melodic ideas because it really helps me to focus on the ear training and technical aspects of what I'm doing without feeling like I have to meet any kind of rhythmic deadline by trying to play a phrase in time with a metronome or trying to lock into the beat and pulse of a jam track. With that being said, the real trick here is this. Once you have started to build this kind of melodic vocabulary, you have to put it into a rhythmic context and a rhythmic environment for it to actually sound like a real musical statement. The bonus step is to experiment with changing the rhythmic location and the rhythmic placement of each note within each phrase, as well as changing the rhythmic duration and the rhythmic value of each note within each phrase. Every example that I have played so far has unlimited rhythmic potential, and you need to spend a good amount of time on developing a strong rhythmic language with every phrase that you learn. So let me play a little bit over a jam track to demonstrate this and see if you can spot the type of melodic contour and melodic shape that I'm using, okay? What kinds of expressive stylistic elements I'm using as far as articulation and inflection, the different types of fingerings that I'm using, the register and the octave that I'm playing in, and finally, what are the melodic rhythms that I'm using with each phrase? If you enjoyed this lesson, go ahead and smash that like button and share this video. If you have any comments or questions, you can leave them below. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you want to see more content like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.